Okay, so just to remind you again about where Sonata sits in this whole architecture that we talked about this morning. It's this business-to-business, provider-to-provider interface between the business applications. So it's the interface you use to talk about products with other providers, other operators. And that's quoting and ordering and serviceability and travel ticketing, billing, all of those sorts of functions. So I want to present a couple of more perspectives from some of our service provider members, and I want to thank them as well in advance for letting me share these. This is from AT&T, just sort of putting their perspective of why the Sonata APIs and why the work MEF is doing around Sonata is important to them. And you can see here, today, when they need to order a service from another partner organization to reach a particular location or to extend their reach, it's all different mechanisms. So they might be over email, it might be ASR is the American ordering sort of system. They might have web portals, they might have custom APIs, but they're all different for each different partner organization. And that's a real pain. It's a real pain in terms of the time it takes for each of those, both the sort of setup time to integrate that into their own systems and also the time for each instance. Each time you've got to send an email or each time you've got to go on a web portal and log on and whatever, someone manually has to do that. Time obviously means cost. And it's just, the whole system is difficult to use, it's prone to error, it relies a lot on people involved, and we all know that people make mistakes from time to time. So it's a big sort of overhead in terms of running their business. And what would like to move to, using standard APIs and using the MEF Sonata APIs, is to essentially replace all of that with a single mechanism that's automated. So it reduces the time it takes for each instance. It's just an API call. It's software system to software system. Obviously, that reduces the cost. It's more efficient, both in terms of people and in terms of development. And it's much easier for people to understand. There's much less staff training costs that go down. The whole system becomes much simpler and easier to maintain and more streamlined. So that's what they hope to get out of Sonata APIs. And then a similar story here. This is from Colt. So this is looking at the time it takes to spin up a new product or a new service. So typically today, traditional approach, I shouldn't say today, Colt are already well down this journey, but traditional approach, a year to 18 months to integrate a new partner and get everything set up with this new service. And you probably can't read the tiny text there, but it's going through lots of phases of essentially creating a project team, agreeing a budget, agreeing the sort of terminology and the principles of the integration, then getting into the details and the use cases and actually a functional API, design it, build it on both sides, test it. Because it's all brand new, it's probably going to go through several cycles of testing and retesting. Finally, you're going to put it into production and deploy it. And so as we move on with Sonata, we can sort of start to see this timeline shrink down. So with initial Sonata adoption, we can get rid of some of those phases, and hopefully some of that testing and retesting will shrink down, because no longer is this something completely new, it's something we've done before, or both parties have done before. So we might get it down to maybe 4 to 6 months. As we get more experience doing it, we should hopefully be able to take some of that out, more of that out. So all of that design and build work that happened, we don't need to do. You've done it once, so you don't need to do that again. It's already designed, it's already built, you've implemented it. All you've got to do is spin up another copy with a new partner. So that time shrinks away. And finally, where we'd like to get to is where you don't need to spin up a new project and a project team and a budget and everything to do an integration. It's just as simple as say, okay, onboard a new partner, do a quick sanity test, and then go into production. So you should be able to get that down to 2 to 3 weeks instead of 12 to 18 months. Again, we're not all the way through that journey yet, but that's where we're trying to get to. So I've got a few slides here that sort of compare the sort of traditional pre-standard model with where we'd like to get to with Sonata. looking at different categories. So this is looking at sort of what competitive advantage does this give you to use Sonata APIs. It, first of all, enables you to offer dynamic services not just in your own footprint, but outside of your footprint by automating the way that you use services from your partners. It gets rid of the complex manual processes and all those different mechanisms and replaces it with a single standard API. And that means that to spin up a new service for a new customer, whereas it would today take weeks or months, and that's assuming that the physical infrastructure is in place, you should be able to do that in minutes because it's all automated. And many providers can do that today within their own networks, but there are very few providers who can do that today when they have to go outside of their own network. That also, of course, directly feeds into revenue. If you can do something in minutes that used to take months, then you can obviously start getting paid much more quickly. It also boosts revenue because you can just acquire, get more business. If you can do that much faster, it's a competitive advantage. So, if someone can get quotes from you very easily through an automated API, then they're probably going to ask for more quotes than they would have done if they had to, send you an email or phone you up or whatever. So it actually increases your opportunities for selling your products. And then, maybe the biggest benefit is in the operational area. So, all that integration stuff, again, it becomes, instead of a partner-by-partner integration cost, you've got a one-time cost just developed to the standard API, and then hopefully very short time to integrate each partner because it's just a case of using those standard APIs. You hopefully get rid of a lot of manual processes, so that should make things less error-prone, lower OPEX. You need fewer staff, or you can redeploy staff to actually help create new products and services and generate revenue rather than using staff to grind through this integration work. So this is where Sonata fits again, and we'll look at sort of an example here, looking at the whole flow. So suppose a customer requests a new service, so that's going to be through the Cantata API to the British service provider on the left. I guess here we've got a British and an American one. So that's the request for the end-to-end service. Here it's going from some UK office to some US office, but the UK service provider doesn't have any US presence, so they're going to need to partner with a US operator to reach that US office. So they're going to then essentially request a wholesale service from that American operator, and that's what goes over the Sonata API. And we'll go into the details of all the functions that involves, but it's not just as simple as making an order. It's first of all saying, can they get to the location, and then getting quotes, and probably quotes from a multitude of operators, and then picking one and doing an order, and so forth. And then, of course, each of those two providers are then going to program their part of that end-to-end service down into their own infrastructure. So that's using the Legato and Presto APIs that we heard about before lunch. So I just wanted to put this slide up again. Again, this was one that we saw earlier before lunch, but just to try and reiterate here how our APIs are structured. The fact that we have this framework where we're reusing sort of standard protocols, whether it's HTTP or netconf. We then have the product independent part. And actually in the framework I should mention as well, one of the key things in there is security. Some of those mechanisms come with security, frameworks come with security sort of built in already, or at least to some extent. Others have a bit less. So we've got a project going on, or hopefully starting again at the end of the week, looking specifically at security for inter-provider APIs. It's obviously a really key area. Security for APIs within an organization is sort of still important but less critical. If it's the same organization on both sides, then you hopefully have some level of trust. But as soon as you start talking about APIs that cross from your organization to somewhere else, then security is a very big deal, and we need to make sure that that is covered. So that's one of the key pieces of work that we've got going on at the moment, looking at that. So moving on from the framework, we have a layer of sort of product-independent information. So this is essentially information is the same whether you're ordering a MEF service or a car or an ice cream. You have to agree a price. You have to know who it is who you are, who your contacts are on the other side, where is it located. So all of these things are sort of independent of whether it's an IP service or an Ethernet service or a car. And then finally, we have the product-specific bits. That's where the details of the actual product or the actual service go in, the carrier Ethernet, and that's built entirely on the service attributes that we talked about first thing this morning. So just to sort of try and put that in context a little bit, here's all the sort of standards that go into that. So we start at the top left, we've got all of those service definitions. That's all the numbers that I told you to remember this morning, which I'm sure you did. So I've got some new numbers for you now. So we start off with the Sonata, the requirements and use case documents. So this is to make sure that when we start trying to build an API, we're actually building something that meets the business needs of the service providers. And you see there's several there covering different functions, serviceability, which is address and site validation and product offering qualification, quoting, ordering, and then inventory, being able to actually understand what you've ordered. So we feed all those down into the interface profile specification. Karthik talked about those earlier. That's where we take the information models and apply them to each of those functions. And then we feed that down into what we're now calling the interface implementation specification, or IIS. That's the actual API definition and the documentation that goes with it. It's no point producing an API that isn't properly documented. So we want to try and embed as much documentation of the API into it itself, but you also need some sort of overview and examples and so forth. So that's all bound together into this IIS specification. And then that's all the product agnostic part. We then got this sort of similar stack for the product independent part, the product specific part. So we've got product specifications that are built out of those service definitions, and then those feed into the standard data models that form the payload of the API. So there we go, that's just to sort of emphasize that. The sort of product independent side of it, and then the product specifics. I should note here, this diagram makes it look like the product independent part is much bigger, and the product specific part is really small. Of course, in practice, a lot of that product independent part is what we're picking up from other SDOs. That's the ONF Transport API or the TMF APIs. So really where MEF is trying to focus is on the product specifics, the things that are specific to our MEF services and our MEF service work. So this is looking specifically at the roadmap for Sonata. So we had the overall sort of LSO roadmap before, but just sort of focusing in here. So you can see that the work we've done to date is in these sort of four key areas of serviceability, quoting, ordering, and inventory. This is what's in the Release 4 SDK, which came out a couple of weeks ago. At least the sort of early drafts of these. Some of the standards are published, some of them are still in their sort of final work. Others are sort of just getting started. And then when we look at sort of what else is to come, this probably isn't comprehensive, but there's certainly work to do around trouble ticketing. That's something that we're just starting on as a proposal to start working on that this meeting. Billing and invoicing, and then sort of contract and catalog. So actually establishing a relationship with another provider is another area. Okay, now I'm handing over to Laurent.
Thanks, David. So we could talk about the use cases or the multiple scenarios which we have under Sonata in isolation. One of the experience which I've drawn working on Sonata, on having that B2B API or putting a business case together internally to a service provider, is to what extent that API, that piece of software would actually transform many aspects of your business. And if we go through some of the use cases one by one, starting with address and site validation, is for every single one of the use cases, you're going to be impacting a number of stakeholders involved within your quote-to-cash process flow. Internally to any service providers or any of your partners you're interfacing with. So transformation has been a buzzword in the industry now for many years, a couple of years, 2-3 years. And I meet customers who are on their way to transforming their businesses. Service providers are transforming in the very same fashion, driven by the necessity to implement APIs like Sonata. Address and site validation is obviously key for two service providers here depicted on that example between a British and American service providers to obviously validate the site locations and having the ability to deliver the service. Another one of the functionalities which is available today as part of the SDK release 4, released last week, is the product offering qualification, where a request is going to be initiated by the buyer to determine whether the seller has the ability to deliver a particular product in a specific location. And the engagement goes on to the quote, the ability to quote, again impacting groups who today would be, depending on their location, their geographies across the globe, would do this in a very manual fashion. Suddenly we are going back to these teams and to these stakeholders and saying, we can automate the whole process. We can make it a lot simpler so that essentially we have the ability to turn up services in a real-time fashion. Quote is a good example to support that. As well as the order capability, of course. Once we have the quote, we can cascade down to the order and proceed to the turn up of that service, spanning 2 or more service providers. Inventory, again, typically impact over area of the business. It tends to be into a very specific IT silo. The people who've been working on inventory for many years, maybe spanning multiple hardware platforms, suddenly in the context of, again, transformation and having network as a service, maybe looking into the context of real-time inventory. And Sonata, again, is the glue bringing this together from a service provider standpoint. Future scenarios, and David talked about 2 of them briefly. Trouble ticketing is the one which we are going to start working on formalizing as a project later on this week with some of the members. That's if you think about it in the context of a life cycle, that's probably the next logical step for us to add enhancements, strategic enhancement into the Sonata API, having the ability for a buyer to contact a seller and to raise tickets automatically, and having the whole list of features related to that trouble ticket with resolutions, etc. Leading to a more seamless transaction between service providers. The other big one, which is probably a bit further down the line from a roadmap standpoint, is going to be the billing and settlement, probably supported by blockchain. In fact, it will be supported by blockchain. We've had, if I remember correctly, there were a proof of concept at MEF 18, so the same place last year, around a blockchain settlement between service providers. There have been a various number of initiatives across the industry happening between service providers and trying to demonstrate that blockchain works in some specific scenarios. Within the LSO committee, we will try to standardize that whole approach and make it work in the context of Sonata again. We talked about Sonata SDK release 4, which came out a couple of weeks ago, available on the MEF website, with updated definition for inventory, quote, serviceability, and product order. With a whole suite of use cases, which have been updated there too, for your consumptions, as well as a really good resource. I've read it, really great FAQ about what's Sonata, and the big picture. And I think one of the challenges, which I've certainly seen from my perspective, is moving the whole API standardization initiatives away from the realm of the technology people and trying to convince the business people or the product people or maybe the executive leadership of any service provider to convince them that Sonata and all the good work that MEF is doing within the 3.0 framework is indeed the right approach to take. This document just answered many questions here and certainly help out with any justification which you may need internally.
Okay, we've got a few minutes, so I'm going to make my plea again, because this is the last time my last opportunity to talk to you. We have well over 15 projects going on in the LSO committee, and I would say probably about 10 of them are related to Sonata, maybe not quite that many. So again, if this is something you care about, if you think this is going to be valuable to your company, it's not going to happen unless you come and join in and help push it along and participate and contribute, review the drafts, come and join the meetings, come and join the discussions. There's a lot of debate that goes on around a lot of these things about what's the best way to do things, and make sure that it's going to work for not just a few service providers, but work widely across the industry. And we can only make sure of that if we have a broad representation from service providers, and not just the technical people, as Laurent says, but also operations people, product people. We need all of that input to make sure that what we're going to produce is actually going to work and be valuable. So please, if you're not sure how to get involved, come and talk to me or to Laurent or to Karthik, and we can help you get you started and get you up to speed on how to participate.
Certainly a great opportunity to show industry leadership. Please come on board.